There it is, boys. Arguably the best testosterone ester in the world, and in a lot of cases, the savior for guys' libido on TRT. Yes, testosterone cypionate is the mainstream testosterone that gets prescribed to people. And yes, a lot of people do perfectly fine on testosterone cypionate, but there are a lot of guys that also don't do fine on testosterone cypionate. I'm going to get to why in kind of explaining this phenomenon of people taking cypionate and estradiol being in range and total test being at 1,000 and free test being pretty high and SHBG being fine and still them not having adequate sexual function on TRT. Then you got posts like this: test propionate revived my libido. Guy goes, erections and libido, even maintaining 10% body fat, were lackluster and mediocre. Finally made the switch to test prop after 2 years. I finally understand how drastically testosterone can ramp up your libido. Also noticed that the more I increased my testosterone dose, the higher my libido was, whereas before when I was on Sustanon, ramping up the dose away from my sweet spot would create a lot of problems. This is a common thing that people are going to find with the longer esters. This thread, test propionate experiences, where he goes through like where again, you know, kind of the same thing, was on HCG, was on I think Cypionate, yeah, Cypionate in this case. Look, he was dosing sub-Q every other day, 22 milligrams every, that's not a high dose, right? Estradiol should have fell in a reasonable range, and it probably did. He goes, nonetheless, I had a little interest in sex while on test SIP and had to resort to Viagra to initiate with my wife. Orgasms were so my sleep was not the greatest. Long story short, he couldn't actually get approved from his doc, so he had to go UGL, which he wasn't thrilled about, and I wouldn't have been thrilled about either. Then he goes, keeping my HCG dose the same, I started with 10 milligrams of test prop every day sub-Q, nothing for a few weeks. Then all of a sudden I became horny again. It took me by surprise. I haven't been horny in years. There is something to this, guys. There's something to cypionate and enanthate in some cases causing men to not have adequate sexual function on TRT, for erections, for libido to be pretty lackluster and mediocre. I have theories on why this is happening, and I will explain it in this video. But suffice to say, an ester with a half-life of about 19 hours. But there's something to say about what is ultimately a 19-hour half-life testosterone ester that changes the dynamics of both saturation points at receptor sites of testosterone and DHT, and what ultimately minimizes constant exposure to estradiol, which has an effect on the tissues, which is why I think test prop is reviving people's libidos. Coupon codes for product real quick, guys. 20% off Supercharged Dopamine and Nootropics Mastery. These are video courses. The codes are in the description below. Perfect timing. All right. You're especially going to like Supercharged Dopamine if you haven't watched it. Cortex Stack, 25% off. Code for that is 25 Cortex. Torque Stack, all day focus and energy, lots of motivation. Very popular stack. 15% off. Code for that's 15 now. And coaching. I'm in busy season, but still have slots. If you need help on TRT, nootropics, energy optimization, sexual dysfunction, ED, and host of other topics, you can hire me in under a minute at livecortex.com. So first off, there is no shortage of men that are on the testosterone subreddit that are having libido problems on testosterone cypionate or enanthate, but predominantly cypionate. I mean, testosterone cypionate, because it's easier. Ultimately, the studies had determined that it is impractical to be dosing daily, which is why prop kind of took a back seat, which is ridiculous because nowadays people inject cypionate daily. And testosterone cypionate has just become, they've decided, right? This is the mainstream testosterone that we're prescribing to people. All the clinics have it, you know, your doctor's going to prescribe cypionate. It's going to be harder for you to get propionate and, you know, other esters. And look, some guys do fine with testosterone cypionate, but some men don't. Estradiol, we know it's somewhat confusing because the serum tells us something, but it doesn't tell us anything about what's happening at the receptor level. And then this post-receptor binding genetic activity that takes place once estrogen binds to ERB or ERA receptors. Now, the half-life of testosterone cypionate, the most commonly prescribed testosterone, is anywhere from 6 to 8 days. And this is what I think the problem is in men that are on TRT that are using testosterone cypionate that have libido problems and erection problems, but estradiol is at like 30 or 35, or maybe they're managing it with an AI and it's between 20 and 30, or they've got their dose down to 110, something super low, and the estrogen falls in range. It's that with testosterone cypionate, because of this prolongation of the half-life via the ester, the serum could say that you're at 32 picograms per milliliter estradiol, which is kind of the cutoff for erection issues. It's like right around there, you're good. Below that, you're good. Below 20, you're not good. But if there's steady state of androgens and steady state of aromatase activity converting androgens into estradiol in tissues, the serum could say it's at 30 picograms per milliliter, but you're getting constant exposure at the tissue level, binding to estrogen receptor sites, activating a estrogen genetic action thereafter, which is where you get in the tissues the effects of estradiol. There is rarely, even if the serum, changes a little bit and drops to maybe 27, if you inject like infrequently, then the estradiol is going to peak, and then it's ultimately going to drop back down, which is why infrequent injections with Cypionate are probably better for minimizing exposure to constant levels of estradiol. It's like the tissue levels may still be continually saturated with estradiol. This is one of the reasons I think that men have issues with erections and libido on TRT. We know past a certain range of estradiol, the cutoff in various studies is about 32 picograms per milliliter, regardless of your total testosterone. So for those of you that are thinking, well, those guys aren't on TRT, the study was clear. Regardless of your total T, boys, all right, estradiol cutoff is about 32 picograms per milliliter. Every TRT doctor worth their weight in salt will concur. These guys have sufficient levels of androgens, right? They've got sufficient DHT, they got sufficient total testosterone, they got usually higher than the reference range free T. If they're on TRT, SHBG is fine, but yet sexual function is not good. I'm contending that what I think is happening in these cases is that there is oversaturation at the receptor sites, there is overactivation of the genetic activity, post-receptor binding, post-ERB and ERA receptor binding, estrogen receptor binding, and like we've already done deep dives on at the tissue level in penile tissue, like how estradiol induces ED, right? Just vascular changes via nitric oxide and vascular endothelial growth factor mediated mechanisms. Whereas if you look at the terminal half-life of testosterone propionate, it is 19 hours. Just to put this practically, if you inject 20 milligrams a day of testosterone propionate for a total of 140 milligrams a week, a pretty good TRT dose, you inject in the morning at 7 a.m., by the next day at 7 a.m., your testosterone will have already started dropping. So in this case, you peak in testosterone very quickly because propionate has a pretty quick peak. I mean, it's 2 to 4 hours, possibly a little more, possibly a little less. I think it really is going to depend on the person. But, once it gets to its peak, it doesn't just stay there. It starts to slowly go down. In these cases, you are not chronically exposed to elevated levels of estradiol or even inadequate in-range levels of estradiol, but where the tissues are constantly being saturated by estradiol. I mean, guys go sub-Q with testosterone cypionate, and well, then it's an even slower release. Then it's an even constant release of steady-state androgens and steady-state estradiol. Again, even if you're at 30 picograms per milliliter, which, guys on TRT, unless you're in a low dose, usually aren't. They're usually at 40 or 45 or whatever. Still, there's constant saturation of the estrogen receptors with estradiol with these longer esters. Whereas prop, you get a peak, you get, in some cases, depends on your dose really, but in a lot of cases, if you're doing a healthy TRT dose on testosterone propionate, you're going into the super physiologic range. I mean, you might hit 900, 1,000, 1,150, 1,200, 1,250. Who really knows unless you check your blood, but likely you're going super physiologic in that peak that day. And then you're going back down. Now, the benefit, I think, in why people have massive libido, and we're going to get to more anecdotals here in a second, and erections just come fucking full force back when they had been on Cypionate for 2 years, right? Hadn't been able to get their libido and erection straight, is because first, super physiological peak of testosterone, super physiologic peak of DHT, adequate receptor binding of androgens. Okay, this is very critical for libido and erections. Yeah, there is a conversion of estradiol, which may raise past where you may be comfortable, but it's not going to stay there. This is the critical distinction between esters. The estradiol's going to go back down. If you're injecting test prop every other day, well then for sure, I mean, look, 19 hours, either way, whatever the dose is, it's going to start to go down. So that estrogen is not going to stay peaking, and there won't be this constant spillover via aromatase action in tissues of androgens to estrogen. You'll reach your peak of estradiol and then it's going to start to go down. So you don't have constant saturation at the estrogen receptors of estrogen, and therefore the receptors like at the tissue level where this really matters, like specifically penile tissue, get a break. They get a break from what is, in these cases of cypionate and anything, these super long esters, usually just constant exposure. You hear all the TRT guys like, oh, you want to reach steady state. You want a steady state of androgens. You just want steady state. Well, guess what steady state of androgens means? Steady state of estrogen conversion. It means constantly saturating the receptors with estradiol, regardless of what the serum says, at the tissue level. Right, there is no break unless you're doing infrequent injections, which a lot of people aren't on Cypionate and enanthate, from estrogen receptor binding. What's interesting about this this thread that I briefly flashed on the screen in the beginning of the video of testosterone propionate reviving this dude's libido is he goes, after 2 years, I finally understand how drastically testosterone can ramp up your libido. Also, I noticed that the more I increased the testosterone dose, the higher my libido was, whereas before when I was on Sustanon, ramping up my dose away from the sweet spot would create a lot of problems. Let's just talk about that, because this herein is like a very critical point. Longer esters, when you move away from the sweet spot, what that really means is you're moving away from the spot that keeps the estradiol in a range where you're sexually functional. And when you increase your dose of Sustanon, Cypionate, and enanthate, because they're such long-acting esters, you're going to increase the aromatization point to your threshold. I mean, you're not just going to aromatize forever. There's a threshold for people. And since they're long-acting esters, well, you don't get a break from that. You're just getting constant estrogen exposure at the receptor side. So it creates problems in these longer esters when you're able to reach the level of androgens that actually give you sufficient libido and erectile function. It creates additional issues because there's just a lot of spillover, constant spillover. There's a lot of aromatization. I mean, it's very, very clear. The bros, the bodybuilder bros, they know. They use test prop for shows. Why? Because they don't retain a lot of water. There's less nitrogen retention. There's generally less of that sort of bloated physical look as a result of ultimately less estradiol at a time, just being constantly, bound to receptor sites. In this case, ramping up the test prop dose increases libido. Like, you'll see this with Cypionate, like ramping up the Cypionate dose often does not do that. It does the opposite. I had to be very aggressive with, very scheduled dosing of Arimidex when I was on high dose Cypionate. I'm talking about 210 milligrams, 180 milligrams, 168 milligrams, even 140 to a lesser extent. Like it just take the estradiol far too far, and immediately erections go to shit, libido goes to shit. I start feeling a little funky. Whereas upping the dose on prop, yeah, you're going to get even more of a super physiologic peak of testosterone and DHT. You're going to get some spillover to estradiol, but it does not stay there. Okay, it goes back down. You got your peak and then it drops. You got your peak and then it drops. Now, I did a video on testosterone propionate, something to the effect of like, I injected libido fuel and instantly regretted it. Now, that was somewhat of a catchy title because I didn't necessarily instantly regret it. The post-injection pain with test prop is somewhat annoying. It does hurt. I mean, it's not significant to where you can't walk or anything. I mean, come on, we're men, like whatever, deal with it. But there's that. Test prop can significantly overstimulate you if you're not used to it. Like, it may take time for you to actually adjust to the super physiologic, super quick peak of androgens, and you might feel like you drank too much coffee and taken modafinil and taken teacrine, and you're just fucking stimulated out of your mind, bro. Those peaks in estradiol may bother people as well, but again, it tends to come back down. So I mean, look, there are cons to using testosterone propionate. I mean, you also have to inject it every day or every other day. Like, you really should not be injecting test prop every third day. It's got to be every day or every other day. But when I run prop versus Cypionate, and now I'm back to running prop for the record. I've been telling you guys I'm going to discuss my tier T protocol. It's prop. The energy, okay, that testosterone type energy is instant. I mean, a mere hour after injection, probably sooner. Not placebo. Levels are actually rising. You do respond to that. Those of you that are like trigger happy to go, no, bro. The energy is actually remarkably constant, right? It's better than Cypionate for me. Remarkably better. Night and day difference better. It's just constant energy. It's like peaking throughout the day. When I first start running a cycle of test prop, when I get off of Cypionate, yeah, the energy is a little much for the first day or two. Then that balances out. But the libido and the erection quality, right? Yeah. Probably nitric oxide mediated mechanisms, a lot of DHT receptor binding, androgen receptor binding elsewhere. The sexual function that you get from testosterone propionate is second to none. And you're going to see this repeated over and over and over and over and over again on all the forums, on YouTube videos, with the bodybuilder bros and everybody else in between. For me to match the sexual function that I get with propionate daily injections of 20 milligrams, that's where I'm at right now, I have to inject infrequently with testosterone cypionate, like once every fourth day, something like 70 milligrams or so. Then I can reach close to the libido that I get on prop, not quite, but it comes with additional side effects with cypionate with every fourth day injection. and that is excessive acne. Whereas I really don't get acne when I'm injecting testosterone propionate. What do you know? On the 4th day, I'm injecting Cypionate every 4th day, 70 milligrams. Yeah, I mean, I'm basically dropping in all levels. Estradiol is dropping as well, but total testosterone is dropping, and it doesn't feel good. Like on that 4th day, I'm not feeling good on the 3rd day, in that protocol. It suffices for sexual function to the largest degree possible with Cypionate, but I generally just don't feel good. Whereas with 20 milligrams of prop a day in the morning, just in and out, super easy, done and done. Stable energy throughout the day. Libido and erections are fucking crazy, boys. I cannot get myself to stop looking at the girl at the gym with the great butt. I can't focus. Sex, like the sex stuff, like sex, having sex is very different. It's very different, right? I mean, sensation's better, climax is better, every single thing about it is better. All of the looks, the feels, the visuals, the sounds, all the good stuff that might turn a person on, where like on Cypionate and Anethate, a lot of guys lose that. They lose that sort of visceral mental connection to sex, where it's like really turning them on. Every single second of everything you see and everything you feel and everything you hear is turning you on. It doesn't happen, on Cypionate and Anethate for some guys, depending on the protocol. Whereas prop, the sex is unbelievable. It's like true. It feels very natural. So let's talk about that. A study that is titled Short-Acting Testosterone, which is what testosterone propionate is, more physiologic. What they're really referring to is less suppression of the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, and specifically less suppression of luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone concentrations, pulsatile concentrations. So they end up concluding treatment with an FDA-approved short-acting testosterone, which would be testosterone propionate, has the potential to treat hypogonadal symptoms while better preserving fertility compared to currently available longer-acting modalities. There you fucking go, boys. This is another paper that is titled Short-Acting Testosterone Appears to Have Lesser Effect on Male Reproductive Potential Compared to Long-Acting Testosterone in Mice, where they conclude that long-acting exogenous testosterone, i.e. testosterone cypionate, testosterone enethate, appear to impair male reproductive capacity and luteinizing hormone levels when compared to short-acting testosterone. Short-acting testosterone appear to cause less luteinizing hormone suppression. Identifying strategies to increase testosterone while simultaneously preserving male fertility is important for treating young men with hypogonadism. There you go, baby. Case in point. So with test prop, you get a super physiologic peak of testosterone, which will give you more androgens, more DHT, more activation of the receptors, more receptor binding, more of the saturation point, which I've always contended is actually important for some of the positive effects of testosterone. You get less estradiol binding to receptor sites consistently. They actually get a break because you have a peak and then you have a trough. You have an actual trough. You can stepwise increase the dose of propionate and correspondingly increase libido and erections, which is not something you can typically do with cypionate and enethate. My personal experience and a lot of people's experiences on the forums is that testosterone propionate after, cypionate and enethate really didn't do a whole lot, and you're walking around with lackluster libido and no morning wood. It's just like, this is ridiculous on testosterone. Prop revives all of it. Brings libido back, brings erections back, brings sensitivity back, brings the enjoyment of sex back. It's everything sexually that you would think TRT should be when you go on propionate. And there is less suppression of the HPG axis, the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, specifically less suppression of luteinizing hormone concentrations. This is really, really big, guys. Now look, I'm not saying you should switch from CYP to prop, from enethate to prop. It's just like, do what you think makes sense. But if you have a clinic that has it and you're having libido and erection issues on cypionate or enethate, and estradiol is like right around range or maybe just a little bit above range, and you still can't figure that out, it's like people post this stuff all the time on Reddit. I'm sitting at 1100, E2's 35. PRL is sitting at 5 nanograms per milliliter or 10 nanograms per milliliter. What? And I have no libido, no erections. Like, what the fuck's going on? If you're in that position and you've exhausted all resources, try testosterone propionate. It might take some time, might not happen immediately. It does for some people. It may take 2-3 weeks, but I can guarantee you, if the issue is this oversaturation of estradiol, the receptor sites, and this steady state of androgens, which people think is so good, but which, by the way, in no way, fucking shape or form mimics diurnal natural rhythm of testosterone or of luteinizing hormone secretion, try going for what is actually mimicking, in more of a way than cypionate and enethate, diurnal rhythms of testosterone, pulsatile luteinizing hormone release, peaking in the morning, peaking somewhat throughout the day, and then testosterone dropping in the evening. And see how you fare. See how you fare. Because testosterone propionate is a miracle libido enhancer, right? It'll give you back the sexual function that you lost on other esters of TRT for some men. Consider it. Consider all the scientific literature that I have posited. Consider all the anecdotals that I have presented to you today. My personal experience is that prop is 100% better. I mean, scores better for libido interactions. It's just harder to achieve that same state where I would get with prop. With Cypionate, you just got to take an AI, and there's just all kind of manipulation of the protocol that you got to do, and it really just gets tiring. If you need my help on TRT protocol optimization, nootropics, energy optimization, sexual dysfunction, ED, host of other topics, but TRT is a bulk of the consultations that I'm doing these days. Hire me. You can do that in under a minute at livecortex.com. We'll be on a call or an email back and forth in under a day. Cortex stack. I mean, this is high level focus, clean stimulant flow, mental energy, verbal fluency, mental processing speed. It's very, very potent. You're going to notice it. You want that in a nootropic. 25% off code for that is 25 Cortex. Torque stack. Pretty much same thing. Lasts longer, more motivation and focused and dopamine centric while being stimulating. 15% off this stack right now. Code for that is 15 now. Boys, it has been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. If you liked the video, please like the video. It makes a huge difference if you hit that like button in whether or not YouTube shows our channel to more people, which is definitely what we want. Dislike it if you disliked it. All good. Thanks though, bro. Sub to the channel because you are going to love the scientific breakdowns. I get into stuff that other people won't get into. I'm seeing things in the literature, in physiology, in people that I'm working with that other people aren't seeing, and I'm sharing them on this channel. Make sure you're subbed. Otherwise, hope you're having a great day. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one.